o la persona que me estás viendo desde Casilda, desde Canadá, desde Cajamarca, Perú. Mi nombre es Nachito y vamos a retomar el Braid con pistas de comentarios, aprendiendo temas de diseño, desarrollo y demás. Allá vamos.
I like the fact that a couple of the worlds end with a very nice minimal puzzle that lets you take what you've learned and it gives you, again, it's like a little paradox, a little koan. You know, this one takes a little bit because it's like, well, we have one key in the world, but the key has a shadow, so one of us needs to open one gate, the other needs to open the other gate. How does that happen? Because if we try to, quote, program the guy and just head into the gate, well, it just uses up the key and then it's broken and it's not rewindable. My solution to this, actually, which I was quite proud of, is significantly more elaborate than the simplest solution. I bonked the guy, didn't take the key, then I went up and stood by the gate without the key.
Yeah.
But before bonking him, I did a motion such that my shadow self then picked up the key and took the shadow key to the gate. I then went back, picked up the real key, and opened the other gate. Aren't you proud of me?
I guess.
This is like way more complicated.
I'm still not sure how
solution.
you do the motion. Yeah. The solution I had in mind when I did this
was
just to come up with something a little bit simpler, right? So the problem is, of course,
which also uses the mechanic in a nice way. So
if you use the key in your universe ever, right, it's gone. The point being, though, you can generate an infinite number of shadow guys with shadow keys, so it doesn't matter if his goes away, right?
Right.
And so the simplest way to do it is just aim yourself and just rewind before you hit the gate. And this platform is placed so that you can do a nice ballistic motion.
And again, because he does what you do, as opposed to going where you went, his ballistic motion continues even though you never went there.
Now, this is the minimalist version of the level, because if I wanted to do the shock version of the level, I could have put like 9 gates in a row, and you would have been like, oh, this is completely absurd. And it would have been a little tweakier, but maybe I could have figured out a way to make it like nice. But you know, you can jump actually standing right before the gate, and as long as you rewind, you know, the guy will hit it. And that's sort of the speed run way to do it, right?
Nada de esto estaba. Ah, sí, las casas de la derecha sí. Pero no el barco. El cambio auditivo es terrible. Es un poco perturbador el anterior. Bien. A ver qué nos cuentan sobre el arte.
The early versions of this castle were not as messed up looking. In fact, it was not all busted. It was more intact, but there was a theme of duality with like 2 windows and like 2 kind of pieces projecting forward with kind of a staircase going up in between them. And here it's evolved a bit, but we still have the 2 stained glass windows with the princess facing us and also running away. Overall, this is a lot more destroyed and messed up looking.
I'm still getting sort of that naive feeling of the princess solves all my problems.
Sure, yeah.
Right?
It kind of looks like one of those popsicles you break in half. That is 2, there's 2 popsicle sticks.
I haven't seen those in a long time.
Neither have I.
That's probably still a thing.
Yeah, it also looks like the 10 Commandments, which Moses broke in half, actually.
Bueno, vamos a terminar estos. Tuki por acá. Tuki por acá. Estar en un aeropuerto de joven, tomándose una cocucha. Mundo 6. ¡Qué emoción! Vacilación. Tal vez en un mundo perfecto, el anillo sería un símbolo de felicidad. Es un signo de devoción incesante, aunque no encuentre a la princesa nunca dejará de intentarlo. Siempre llevará el anillo. Pero el anillo hace notar su presencia. Brilla para los demás como una señal de advertencia, hace que la gente se pare a mirarlo. Sospecha, desconfianza, sabotea las interacciones antes de que Tim pueda abrir la boca. Con el tiempo aprende a manejarse con los demás con cuidado, imita su paso indeciso y se abre camino entre sus defensas. Pero esto es agotador y solo funciona hasta cierto punto, no le aporta lo que necesita. Tim empieza a ocultar el anillo en el bolsillo, pero apenas lo soporta. Si lo oculta demasiado tiempo, esa parte de él podría ahogarse. Ahora viene el nivel en el cual el anillo es una mecánica. Me gusta arquetípicamente el anillo, porque para empezar podés empezar a jugar con las referencias a el simbolismo del matrimonio y el simbolismo de El Señor de los Anillos. Por supuesto, el anillo tiene una base en Saturno, ¿no? El anillo que uno se pone en la mano originalmente empezó siendo un ritual saturnino, por los anillos de Saturno, por supuesto, ¿no? Bueno, a ver qué aprendemos.
It is very easy when talking about art with a capital A to like crawl too far up your own asshole and be lost up there and never get out, right? And as soon as we started this conversation, somebody listening to it thinks that has already happened, right? But again, like there is value in all these things, right? Even so, I'm not a big fan, for example, of the very concept of escapism. One thing that I got taught culturally, and that I think people believe even more today than when I was growing up, is that movies are escapism and books are escapism. And the reason they're so good is because they let you get away into an imaginary world, away from your life, which is surely must be terrible if you want to get away from it, right? And I have never liked that idea.
I think it's...
But not because it's completely wrong, simply because it's incomplete. Escapism actually is a valuable thing. People have a hard time sometimes. Sometimes they're so distraught or depressed that just getting through the next week, anything that helps you do that is valuable. And the world...
Be it a movie or a drink or 3 or whatever.
The world is so big and there are so many people in it that the number of people in that state at any one time, in fact, is a large number.
Probably the majority, actually.
So, from that standpoint, a certain amount of escapism is actually very helpful. It is one of the things that can help us live. For me, however, though, I think that if that is all that we do, if that is all that we use this technology of art for, we're kind of missing something because it can do a lot more. The way that I always used to think about it when I heard this escapism idea, which I probably first heard in high school or something, I contrasted it with my own experience and I was like, no, like I go to see a movie not because I want to get away from things, but I want to go towards something, right? I go to see a film or read a novel because I expect that the author has something to show me that will enrich my life or change it in a substantial way, and that I will come out of that I'm trying to find the right adjective. I wanted to say a larger person than I went in, which is certainly true if you eat movie theater popcorn and nachos, but larger in
a richer person,
like understanding more, having a more nuanced view of the world, a little bit wiser, and these things. And that pursuit, however it takes place, both on the viewer side and on the author side, is really what I mean when I say art with a capital A. And I know that different people can have different definitions. But to me, anybody trying to push that forward, even if they have very different ideas of what is meaningful than I do, we're on the same team in some way. And there kind of ain't that many people on that team, is what I feel like.
Y voy a sumar, sí, a todo lo que dijo. Sigue en su línea de que hay una razón para todo lo que hace, está todo bastante premeditado. A todo lo que dijo, con lo que estoy de acuerdo, le sumo respecto a la definición de arte, ¿no? Me gusta esa definición intuitiva de arte. No es como que está pensada en términos formales, pero es mi misma definición de arte. Y sigue marcando un contraste, a ver, una crítica común al arte moderno, es que carece de contenido, sobre todo después de todo lo que sucedió en los 50 con Duchamp y Warhol y todos esos, que queriendo parodiar la comodificación del arte y la comercialización del arte, terminaron generando un marco conceptual que terminó validando las mismas cosas de las cuales ellos se burlaban. Entonces pareciera que hablar de arte en estos tiempos modernos te presenta con esa dicotomía. Arte es o lo que se hacía antes, lo pictórico, lo que tiene algún valor por su valor artesanal, que es una definición, es una palabra que para mí encapsula mucho mejor eso que la gente habla como arte tradicional o como verdadero arte antes de que se corrompiera, ¿no? No estás hablando de arte, estás hablando de artesanía, ser pictórico, ser un buen pintor, ser un buen músico, en el sentido de poder ejecutar bien tu instrumento, saber qué colores usar o saber tocar bien cierto instrumento. Para mí está más cercano al concepto de artesanía que al de arte. Y no por eso arte tiene que ser el mingitorio de Duchamp o una banana pegada a la pared en una muestra, en un museo. Sin embargo, es un error para mí grande como una casa querer ponerle una definición al arte. Y hay algunas raíces de pensamiento postestructuralista en esa opinión. Y si bien no me interesa ser postestructuralista, porque el que deconstruye todo hasta las últimas consecuencias después no sabe cómo volver a armarlo, el deconstruccionismo en sí mismo para mí no es un gran valor, pero sí me interesa esquivar las definiciones academicistas o virtuosistas de arte. Por eso no me interesan las definiciones, por eso definirlo es limitarlo de alguna manera, y me quedo con esta definición, todo para volver al punto de lo que decía John. Es lo que te expande de alguna manera como persona, y eso puede quedar solo en la intención del artista. Capaz no lo logró, pero intentó lograrlo, y eso es suficiente para mí. ¿Esto me hace un hippie de mierda? Bueno, ¿qué se le va a hacer? Empecemos. Hablando de arte, ¿no? Es decir, el hecho de que pueda ejecutar bien esta escena, de que la paleta de colores, de que las pinceladas, de que las partículas que vuelan, de que todo eso funcione bien, eso es lo que yo llamaría artesanía. Ahora, el saber articular todas estas cosas con un propósito mayor, que sería no solo lo visual, sino también lo auditivo, lo interactivo, cómo llegás acá, quién sos cuando llegás y quién sos cuando te vas. Ahí estaría teóricamente el arte. Uf, el cambio. Ya de por sí veo que la paleta cambió sustancialmente, porque fíjate que de fondo no había tonos violetas y ahora los incorporan y genera un contraste fabuloso con el verde. Hasta el verde está un poco más lavado en el anterior. Acá lo han reavivado.
The first thing that jumps out to me here that's new, of course, are the fog particles that are hand animated running a frame stack, which is a new thing we're doing in the remake. And it created this whole new style of particles. I guess we had to ask ourselves, is this Braid-like? And I guess we felt it fit in and supplemented nicely the other stuff we had going. And there's more prominent glow from the torches, which I think enhances the atmosphere.
Well, and it's also suggestive of the title screen.
In terms of the kind of orangey flame and everything. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's what I'm getting out of it, so put it in the game.
I buy it.
So when you're talking about the new effects, are you talking about the sort of color cycling I'm seeing on the flames?
Yeah, there's the flames have this sort of color cycling. I guess they're just like generating particles with more like hue variance, so it's jittering the color around. And it also is casting on the fog, so it's like a nice combination. The slowdown ring is the central new time game mechanic in this stage, and actually looking at the SD version, I think John just did this himself. I don't remember having much input here, and that kind of like speaks to what development was like on that first one, which is to say just kind of more direct and trying to get the game done, and not everything got like a second look or whatever. We certainly took care overall, but some things like that just went in the game. On the remake, it was all about the polish phase. I mean, the entirety of the Braid remaster project was like that last 10%. So
you just put it off for a decade.
Yeah. So there's a new ring that I did build from a lot of particles, and I like it. I don't know if I have anything clever to say about it. I guess one thing about the new slowdown ring is it projects out further. There's like a subtle effect that goes out beyond the obvious bounds of the ring, and it just has more differentiated parts that behave differently.
In World 6, the notion of remastering is expanded to include remixing, if not to say decomposition and redesign of the original tracks. Throughout the game, the worlds gradually become darker, a feature that isn't really echoed in the music. Rather, in the original game, the same handful of tracks keeps playing, eventually resulting in a mismatch between visuals and music. This is most noticeable in World 6, where the darkness is accompanied by tracks such as Downstream, previously associated with the Sunny World 2. The reuse of tracks in the original game also takes a bit away from the excitement of having made progress, and the tracks naturally start suffering from wear and tear as well. The new, darker versions of the tracks generally became more ambient in nature, which caused a problem related to World 6 game mechanic, namely the ring that slows down time. John had originally selected the tracks on the basis that they would remain somewhat recognizable even when slowed down considerably. So while working with more drony materials, we had to retain some transient information that would translate properly when slowed down.
Supongo que eso es una limitante del tener un presupuesto reducido cuando haces el juego originalmente, porque esta música es licenciada, es decir, están los discos que son previos al juego. En Spotify están seguros, porque los tenía agregados yo cuando usaba Spotify. Pero entonces sucede lo que él dice, ¿no? No tenés tanto control y puede que tengas que reutilizar temas y se vuelva un poco monótono. Desgastante fue la palabra que usó. Wear and tear. Cuando tenés presupuesto para composición de temas, lo que buscas es tener motivos, y luego esos motivos pueden volver a aparecer, pero los podés cambiar de instrumento, agregarle otros tratamientos, qué sé yo, podés tener el mismo motivo qué sé yo, de Zelda, por ejemplo, para poner el más común y el más conocido de todos, que si lo tocas las mismas notas, pero un poco más lento, sin tantos instrumentos, al principio puede ser más pensativo y puedes reutilizarlo para la batalla final, poniéndole un montón de bombos y platillos, literalmente, un montón de orquesta y un montón de refuerzo épico atrás, pero el tema, la melodía, lo que llamamos el motivo, es el mismo. Y esos son los lujos que te puedes hacer si mandás a componer la música a medida para tu juego. Esencialmente es una especie de... Diría que es una cuestión de economía, pero no es una cuestión de economía. Economía porque podés, digamos, componer el tema una vez y sacar 20 temas del mismo tema, entre comillas. Pero no es una cuestión de economía, no es por ahorrar, sino por crear familiaridad y crear un ritmo en el juego, ¿no? Esto que te decía de Zelda, ¿no? Si cuando llegas a la batalla final escuchás lo mismo que escuchaste, solo que inflado y épico, eso crea emocionalmente en vos una respuesta de mirá lo lejos que llegué. Arranqué con el mismo tema, pero era pobre y era pequeño y era débil. Y al final del juego estoy más preparado. Y la música, el usar la misma melodía, pero instrumentada de manera diferente, refuerza esa emoción. Entonces lo que se busca es todo el tiempo eso, ¿no? Continuemos. Vamos a ver qué nos dicen del diseño y avanzar.
And then World 6, again, came from these physics ideas. It's like, okay, relativity. You have this time dilation thing. What if I just, not trying to make it be about speed of light or anything directly, but let's just put time dilation in and just see how that goes. And I wasn't sure at first if that was going to generate enough interesting situations.
Right.
And it turns out to have, although it is mostly kind of binary, right? It's like, well, I want something to go slow is the way that it gets used.
Right.
But that's actually mostly fine. And there are nuances to some of the levels that make it more like the analog part of it comes into play a little bit more. And so the initial implementation, so if you're thinking about, okay, what would this actually be?
Yeah.
It's like, well, you're dropping a singularity somewhere where things are totally frozen somehow at that point. And then maybe we add a little bit of a fudge factor so that you don't walk into that point and then the game is over, right? So one of the problems is with the rate itself. Like going way down towards 0, it's not that fun to try and play. Like requiring that is weird.
Because the player just kind of moves too slow through there and it's...
Yeah, everything. Like if anything going through there is so slow that it's not fun to wait for it. Or,
right.
And to require that in a solution wouldn't be that fun.
Right.
Also, even before implementing this, I knew like, hey, the music and stuff, sounds go backward when you rewind. They should slow down appropriately when you're in this thing. And I already could picture in my mind what that would feel like. Like you would go into the music and it's like, right? Now, O.2, which is the current factor that I chose, is about the place at which you can still kind of hear the music, but it's pretty slow. Like if you slow things down much further than that, the sonic energy is like so slow that you don't even hear anything coherent. And you also, it would be one thing if you were, I don't know, holding the ring in your hand constantly the way you hold a key and moving around. Because then you could like find the spot that does what you want, but it's not like that. It's like you drop it and it's on and now you pick it up. And maybe I could have tried more of the other thing, but that seemed bad because you would be walking around in the slow thing 100% of the time. It's like it.
Well, based on all the things you're saying, I kind of have, I think what I assume the obvious question that anyone would have at this point is, why slowing down? Why not speeding up?
I think I just like the slowing down.
Okay, just aesthetically speaking, you like things going in and going. Whoa.
Yeah, but also there's a reason to bias things in that direction, which is, again, so it's a puzzle game, most of which you have tuned to be playable at 1.0, right?
Right.
If things get slower than 1.0, it's playable.
Right.
Mostly. It's just, slower. If things get a lot faster than 1.0, maybe it's not playable anymore. Like if you're trying to jump on a monster, like if you're jumping on monsters at 0.2, it becomes a really different experience, right?
Yep.
If you're trying to jump on monsters at 5.0, like that's unplayable.
Right.
Now, that said, I never explored. That's the reasoning, or some of the reasoning, right? I never actually went and explored that. And sometimes you do it and you find that there's something you didn't think of. Or whatever.
But this one worked, so
it was fun. I started doing it and I found it was cool and there was enough to do with it, right?
Puede ser una nota que va a sonar muy estúpida, pero esa proporción 0,2, es decir 20%, es decir 1 de cada 5, es una que estoy empezando a usar cada vez más cuando necesito ir a una proporción intuitiva para algo. Y proporciones intuitivas: un medio, un tercio, un décimo. Bueno, ahora le sumé un quinto, porque es como un buen punto. La cabeza lo lee como poco pero no tan poco, mucho pero no tan mucho. Un décimo es demasiado poco, un tercio ya puede ser demasiado, un quinto, no sé, flasheo que es más intuitivo, que es una proporción que la cabeza entiende bien.
Working from the original stereo mix, the general idea was to make the track more foreboding and suspenseful. The rhythm is made to sound more like a beating heart, and the continuous drones are processed with a tremolo effect. To make this possible, the original track was divided into drum and harmonic part using DMix Pro. Here's the extracted drum part. And now the harmonic part. Dividing the original track into drum and harmonic part didn't come without obvious artifacts, so a lot of post-processing had to be done. Here's how the treated drum parts sound like. And now the harmonic part. While the redesigned version of the track was very moody and fitted the artwork, it had too little content that remained audible when pitched down by the game. Luckily, stems came in, which helped to solve this issue. The fifth and final iteration includes elements from the first version, but the melody is now reintroduced, both because it became possible with the stems available, but also because the cello was an important element when pitching down the music.
Nos llegamos a probar cómo se ralentiza la música cuando te acercás. Primero escuchá. Wow. Claro, este es el tema reutilizado de hace 3 o 4 mundos. Ahora entiendo que se refería con lo que cambiaron y cómo desgasta. Claro, esto es lo mismo que escuchabas en el mundo 2, no escuchas ninguna diferencia notoria. Claro, es un poco desgastante y es un poco aberrante respecto a cómo cambiaron las visuales y cómo cambió tu experiencia de juego. Pasemos a la nueva. Increíble. Es excelente. Es excelente. Escuchemos este.
One goal of the Romanesque redesign was, ironically, to make it less romantic. This was primarily achieved by removing the higher notes, which carried much of the romantic harmonization. What's left is a simple modal vamp, and consequently the track also became darker, which was another goal of the redesign. However, by getting rid of the higher notes, we ran into the same issue as with undercurrent, namely that the track became too blurry when pitched down. So I added the transients of the original into the mix. These are quite subtle and not very noticeable when playing at normal speed, but when the track is pitched down, they make a huge difference. The redesigned version also had to sound more ambient and full to accompany the cityscape in the visuals, so a smeared version of the harp bass along with a pitched down version for sub bass were added to the composition.
Esas pequeñas cuerdas que escuchamos puede ser lo que... Esas pequeñas cuerdas, a ver si cuando cambio de modo desaparecen. Y yo calculo que sí. Continuemos.
So World 6 doesn't have the most changes as far as like scenery or new additions, but it has one of the biggest pervasive changes, which is the color palette. And I was never really happy with the color palette in the old game. It's sort of red and blue and a kind of desaturated gray that kind of reads as yellow. And then in the foreground, you have the grass from World 3, which just kind of feels like it's from a completely different palette and doesn't hang together. This was an opportunity to right the old wrongs. And I feel that the pinkish purple background with a lot of orange as well and some blue is a lot more harmonious, and the grass brought closer to teal with more blue present. It's just hanging together a lot more. I mean, to me, this has a kind of like sumptuousness or something, like the pink is kind of erotic or something, but then like also kind of this flame feeling and this distant feeling that's still there. It's like a...
I mean, you say enticing, maybe erotic. Is there maybe like another way of putting that? Maybe seductive, right? Because we're in the thick of it at this point, right? It doesn't get more dangerous than this.
Yeah, that's probably a better word, seductive. But it's like it's a city, right? So maybe it would be some kind of like lounge with like low lights and kind of like a slinky atmosphere or something like that.
Yo creo que puedo decir lo que él quiso decir. No es que sea erótica, es que remite a la luz artificial. Es decir, no hay nada en la naturaleza que produzca una luz violeta o rosa, salvo una luz de neón de ciudad. Entonces yo creo que tal vez eso es lo que está leyendo como temáticamente pertinente. No es que sean niveles más eróticos. I know. Ahora, yes. Me preguntaba qué era el segundo anillo más cercano. Fíjate que hay uno externo y uno interior. El interior te dice cuándo podés agarrar el anillo. Ahí lo puedo agarrar. Vale.
I guess there's sort of a carnival aspect to this lantern thing with the wedding dress inside. This is another case where developing the parallax meant breaking this thing into parts that would move differently. And there's some art and technique to like breaking it up in a way that's functional so that it doesn't separate and break down when it parallaxes. So the pieces are cut very carefully in areas where there's a horizontal stretch that can move across itself without breaking. And there's even depth within the chamber there with the wedding dress figure moving separately from its background and separately from the foreground. So I don't know, it's kind of an eerie thing, I think. Like it has a kind of strange feeling that it's like watching you or tracking you a little bit. It's a subtle effect.
Creo que ese efecto está dado por el hecho de que la novia no tenga rostro.
And now, again, these themes and variations, now we have the clouds. Before we controlled their spacing with rewind, and now we've got the ring, and this first puzzle isn't too hard, and we can just slow down the clouds and get over there. The second puzzle, I think the reason why it took me so long to think of the solution is that you had a platform with a flower on it for purely decorative purposes in a level long ago. And so I thought of this as purely decorative. And so...
See, that's maybe a backfire, because the intent was, the way I think about these levels is they sort of come in pairs, right? They're reprises of each other. And the interesting thing about a reprise is you just get to juxtapose them in your mind and see what's different about them and all that stuff, right? And so this platform needed to be here for this puzzle to work.
Right.
And so, like, if it wasn't on the other one, then maybe it's less like the same level. Although that said, it probably in reality, it would have been fine, right? But it's interesting to hear that, because I'd never had that thought that might cause people to disregard the platform as opposed to maybe continually wondering why it's there.
Right. I guess for me, I read this as a bit of clever misdirection because I was used to the idea that was just decoration.
But you got it eventually.
I got it eventually.
Cheat off the internet.
I did not cheat off the internet. I did get it eventually. The other nice thing here is the influence of the ring is pretty long range. Visually it looks like it might not change things outside the circle, but it changes things from quite far away. And is it a 1 over r squared rule?
If I remember correctly, it is a 1 over r rule because it's 2 dimensions.
Ah, yes, because that's how gravity would work in 2 dimensions.
In 3D, we all know about these 1 over r squared laws, and that's because if you take a sphere that's equidistant from any given point, and then you enlarge it, right?
And the lines of force are getting spread out, and according to Gauss's law, sorry, I'm
this is your wheelhouse right here.
Yeah.
When it comes to something like this, I had that idea from the beginning that it's probably r instead of r squared, but I did try r squared, and it just
fell
wasn't
off too quickly.
Yeah, it just wasn't that good. Like, you want this feeling of like going into molasses and things are slowing down. Right? And when it's r squared, it's much more like you're in the circle or you're not. With a fringe around it, but the fringe is hard to like problem solve with because you don't get it's very
So World 6 is the problem that I have is that it's again, like, I think it's all very clean design. So I don't have
anything to say
about it.
Yeah, that's fine.
There's one tiny thing where like that's sort of related where you put the flower where you're supposed to put the ring.
So that whole puzzle is more messy than I would like. So in a game like that where things move continuously, then making a puzzle clean is kind of about avoiding proximity between wrong solutions and right solutions in terms of like how close they get you to the goal. A dumb example is if you're not supposed to be able to jump across a gap, that gap should be really wide, right? So that you don't think that that's what you're supposed to be trying to do. In this particular puzzle, it was really hard to get it to feel clean, actually. A related but different puzzle is the one we talked about with putting the ring on the cannon.
Right.
That one is cleaner because there's kind of nowhere else to put it. In this one we're talking about, you could put the ring on the ground, and it does affect you, but not quite enough. It's less clear that it's failure, I guess. And maybe that's why, the real reason why I put the flower there is, like, I don't expect people to actively use that as a hint how to solve the puzzle unless they have some weird intuition moment. Really what it was is, after you solve it, it's a little bit cute that like, oh, that flower is there as a thing of where I should put this. But also, it's a little bit cute because that flower is in the earlier version of the level, because this is a reprise of a World 3, and that has the flower as well, and you don't really know why at the time. And it's for this, moderately tenuous, but definitely there's a point to it reason that happens way later in the game. And I just like that. It's not very logical. It's not even necessarily very playable, you know, but it's just a thing that's there.
It's again interesting to contrast that in this case you were okay with helping the player.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is in part because I felt that it's a little messy. Like I just remember there being a lot of adjustment to like get the timing good. I mean, I could have put more gaps that you jump over or something, but I opted for simplicity in the end.
You could have like a granulated thing too, where like there's pits that you could put it in, so like it discretizes the locations.
Yeah, I guess I just felt like that was too complicated and ugly, right? Although, you know, the judgment of how ugly things is, often in design, we're making that based on the mock-up level. And then when you do like the final graphics, it could get a fiction to it and a visual pleasantness that makes you not mind it so much.
El único problema que tengo con el uso de la flor es que también se usa para simbolizar donde spawnean a veces conejitos. Y eso puede ser tal vez un poco cognitivamente ruidoso, ¿no? A ver, ¿esto me habilita algo más? Sí me habilita.
When we're sitting down to design a game, we get to decide everything about how it works. So, we have the high-level idea that there should be an object you could drop to slow down time. How do we decide exactly how it should behave, down to every detail? The game was inspired by strange phenomena created by the laws of physics, and more specifically, the slowdown effect was inspired by time dilation that happens at very high speeds or in very deep gravity wells, so we can start our thought process there. Since we are dropping a localized object, it is much more reminiscent of gravity wells than high speeds. The thing about gravity, or any other physical force, is that it is proportional to 1 divided by the squared distance between the two objects exchanging the force. A simplified way of thinking about this 1 over r squared function is that it's happening because a given amount of force is produced at one place, then the waves or particles emanate out from that point in an ever-expanding sphere. As these mediating particles go out, their density decreases with the surface area of that sphere, which is proportional to r squared in the 3 dimensions of our world. 1 over r squared, and other functions like it, are continuous, so they change gradually with changes in spatial position. 1 over r squared changes very quickly when you're close to the origin, but very slowly in a way that creates only subtle analog differences when you get further out. Analog things are hard to deal with in puzzle games. In general, discrete things are easier for the player to reason about, and easier for the designer to make sure the gameplay experience is clean and not fiddly and not weird. If the speed that you go at changes quickly near the center of the ring, and this speed is a big factor in how puzzles get solved, which it must be, the whole idea of the world is to slow stuff down by placing the ring, then the puzzles would be subject to a lot of fiddliness based on the exact position where the ring is placed. So if you place the ring right next to an object, that object might go at 0.1 speed, 1/10 of normal speed. But if you nudge the ring just slightly over, close enough that it might be hard for the player to intentionally choose distances at this scale, the object might now go at 0.2 speed, which is twice as fast, which makes it very hard to be consistent gameplay-wise. And if we don't limit the slowdown rate and just put a singularity at the middle, then slowdown would become infinite as you approach the center, which can become very awkward for gameplay. If you walk too close to the center or accidentally fell in vertically, it could take a very long time to get back out. And since you manipulate the ring by physically picking it up, and you'd need to be near it to pick it up, this set of game design choices drives us directly into the awkwardness. Anytime you're making choices, and you see they result directly in an unpleasant situation like this, it's a sign you should change those choices. So it was clear to me, pretty quickly, that we wanted to limit the maximum slowdown, and didn't want the maximum slowdown rate to be changing very quickly near the ring. What should the maximum slowdown be? We want it to be slow enough that you can see the effects in an obvious way, because that's very helpful when solving puzzles, and also makes the game feel cool. But also, we want the ability to design levels with lots of tolerance. You want to be able to make puzzles with wide margins of player error when the player is executing the right solution, and this necessitates the slowdown amount to be pretty high. Also, and this may sound shallow, but I wanted the music and sound effects to sound cool as you walk through the slowdown area. At some basic level, the game is about seeing and feeling time distortion, so this may actually be less shallow than it seems. But if the maximum slowdown is too much, solving can become routinely tedious because it just takes too long to move through the affected space. And if the music plays too slow, you can no longer really hear it anymore, both because your brain no longer tracks sounds that are that slow in the same way as normal speeds, and because the sound waves lose most of their energy as they get stretched so far. So the music stops being cool and you don't get as much information about gameplay state from the sound effects. For all these reasons, I settled on an inner radius of the size you can see in the game with a max slowdown factor of 5 times. This inner radius is drawn clearly as a bubble when you place the ring. There is no maximum outer radius, and this is perhaps a design failing, because there's no way to use the ring to affect one object without it affecting everything on the level. This makes levels like impassable foliage much more difficult and messy than they might otherwise have been. But I didn't want to impose an outer radius because I wanted the ring to be as physics-y as possible, and that requires the effect to travel outward forever. Maybe it was a mistake, I don't know. Earlier we said that in 3D, the falloff would be 1 over r squared, and that this would probably change too quickly. When I tried it, yeah, it changed too quickly. I also tried 1 over r, which, in addition to being simple, is what would actually happen in 2D space, and I didn't like that either. Just going by game feel, I settled on a function involving 2 to the minus r. It is this. Boiling the function down to its simplest form, it's just 1 minus 0.8 times 2 to the minus x, where x is the number of radii away we are, and we clamp x at 0, which makes the slowdown constant inside the radius. Here's the code from the game that actually implements this. You can imagine how you might like to change this behavior and what the consequences would be.
Diseño. Tu verdadero nombre es negociación de trade-offs. Si lo hago demasiado grande, entonces los niveles tienen demasiada tolerancia, pero si lo hago demasiado chico, tardás demasiado de poder recogerlo, entonces tengo que estar ni tan allá ni tan acá. Me gusta este, pero este me colisiona con tal otro puzzle, entonces lo voy a mover un poquito más acá. Y ahí estamos, perfecto. Eso es diseñar. Negociar trade-offs. Trade-offs es balances entre dos cosas, ¿no? Yo te doy jugabilidad a cambio de expresividad. No, bueno, devolvimos un poquito de jugabilidad porque así como está no es jugable. Y vas acomodando esas barritas hasta que está perfecto. La otra nota al margen es que es la primera vez que veo la caligrafía de John y me agrada mucho observar que es idéntica a la mía. Las grandes mentes piensan igual. También vi que usa la retícula de puntos, lo cual también para mí es la óptima. Ni reglones, ni cuadrícula, retícula de puntos. ¿Lo escuchamos?
I like this building facade here to the right of the trellis with all the windows. This is a thing that could have just like an overbearing sense of repetition with all those little windows, but it's fragmented and broken up into dissolving into abstraction kind of with the particles in front, causing the windows to sort of shift around or vanish and reappear. Yeah, you can see that motif of like the world dissolving into brushstrokes or dissolving into its elements, working in an interesting way here with these like architectural motifs that have so much regularity to them. Actually, it's harder for me to do architecture. I like working with irregularity, and in fact, like a lot of these architectural things are like kind of organic in a sense because I like to work that way, but it's also referencing the organic stuff earlier in the game and trying to draw contrast.
La arquitectura es difícil de dibujar especialmente por eso, por el tema de la repetición. Por eso no me gusta dibujar arquitectura. Tenés que hacer muchas líneas, muchos paralelos para hacer muchas ventanitas, todas iguales. Chupate un pijón, no me gusta. Y parece que el muchacho tampoco.
These are really cool to me because I can see they're World 6. We're into a very advanced state of human development, of like very elaborate architecture that's way beyond functional. It's highly decorative, but it looks nothing like World 6, at least at first. This one with a hideous green and purple, actually I had to dig into a PSD to find it. I had not saved it out into a JPEG. I probably never showed it to John. It was just a thing I went through when I was getting to something else. Really weird colors. I like a lot this one with the blue backdrop, although we normally try to go for stronger contrast and more color difference between foreground and background.
And it's not imposing to me.
True. It's really not imposing. It doesn't have the right tone for World 6. It's actually kind of like a Zora domain or something. It feels like aquatic and relaxing.
Referencia a Zelda.
I would hang out there. I wouldn't hang out in any of these other screens.
Yeah. Some of these later ones go in a darker direction, and you can see some of the elements that are going to show up in World 6, like the costumes, the figures in these kind of archways. Again, I like these because they're unlike what's in the game, but I'm exploring different motifs and different decorative patterns and rhythms. I have to say I'm less in my element doing architecture, but I'm trying to find elements that I can repurpose. And Braid brings its own challenges because the physical shapes of the foreground and the solid objects within the scene get smaller and smaller compared to World 2, which has like a large ground area where you can do a lot of grass and rocks that fade to darkness. Here, I'm making things that are smaller, that have to fit together with enough structural coherency to at least look like platforms and walls and stuff. But I'm trying to find decorative motifs that support the atmosphere. Here I see a lot of the same architectural elements. I'm copying pasting from the other concepts, and this is based on a actual level layout. There's some additional stuff, but I recognize this area from World 6. Again, they're moving platforms that have animals on them. This didn't show up in the game. It still has this blue kind of aquatic feeling thing, but also kind of marble, maybe like a Roman influence, but just kind of weird. We're seeing more of these figures in the back. They're in robes. Wow, that one looks like Orko from He-Man. We're getting closer and closer to the final look. It's much darker. That's the biggest change. And we have these kind of lurid color lights illuminating these statues, which are costumes or social roles without any humans inside. We have a kind of marble foreground with a lot of detailed carvings that have an organic feeling. Again, I'm more comfortable doing organic stuff, but also there was a concept of trying to underscore the progression towards artificial structures by, in fact, using organic motifs. But we've been in a forest, we've been in the plains and the hills, and now those things are kind of a memory depicted in this artificial form. More and more development of the architectural elements. It's a bit awkward for me because I'm trying to make things that are modular, that'll fit into the available space, which is often pretty small, but I'm using kind of arch motif and these funny tracks that are gonna maybe have lights on them. The foregrounds become really white. Since the background is dark, we can have a really white foreground for strong contrast there, but I'm trying to keep some color in and trying to figure out how to use color. So actually there's a lot of different kind of almost pastel colors present. I think I remained ambivalent about the colors in this world until the end. I can tell from the elements in here that I'm pretty far along in developing the art for World 6, but I'm second guessing myself on the color palette. In particular, the background. We have a white kind of marble foreground, but the background, I wasn't sure I liked what I was working with, which was like red lights and red and blue, but I wasn't sure how to balance that. I do like some of these backgrounds that go more towards amber or ochre or like orangey lights. Feels maybe a little bit too much like the title screen. Like the city in the title screen, and we're not looking at that city exactly. We have to be in another place. I can see I'm playing with blues, teals, and purples also, which, again, is interesting We got back to that much, much later, but that's not what we did in the original game.
Creo que mi favorita es la de las estatuas iluminadas de rojo. Me parece súper dramático.
This was a level in the original game that was rather noisy. There are cannons shooting constantly all over, making the sound a cacophony you can't really decode or get any useful information from. Furthermore, this constant noise disturbs the mood of the music, so all in all, sound loses its purpose here and you get tired, and a lot of people probably turned off audio at this point in the game, unfortunately. So, here we needed to clean up the whole mix to make it communicate the gameplay better, meaning that only the most relevant sounds at any given moment should be heard. That would also make it less innovating and give room for the mood of the music. First thing is that the original cannons didn't really sound like cannons, so you don't instinctively link these sounds to anything meaningful relating to the gameplay. Though, of course, at this point in the game you will probably have learned what the sound is, so this is more an issue in the earlier levels. And then furthermore, there were only 2 different shot sounds in the original game, making it even more monotonous. They were these 2 sounds, and the impacts were like this. So we designed all new shots and impact sounds that had more hints of powder and fire and had much more variation in them. The only thing we kept from the original sound effects was the very characteristic little attack sound that to us made it keep the Braid signature. So this is how the new sounds ended up. And here's some of the bullet impacts. Secondly, we tweaked a lot on the overall volume and listening radius of each cannon in this level to make sure you only hear the immediately relevant cannons and shots. And thirdly, but probably most important, we introduced stereo panning of sounds. Because in the original game all sounds played heart center, but by introducing stereo panning we opened up the whole audio image, making it much easier for the brain to decode and point out what objects make which sound. A small note on the cannon shots and impact is that, as mentioned, they are completely redone from scratch except for the very small attack sound. But because we wanted all sounds in the game to be kept in this expressionistic art style like in organic painting, we didn't focus so much on sounds from actual shots and cannons, but more on small chemical reactions and strange sparks and puffs. So here are some of the elements that these shots consist of. And then this is how it ended up, the remastered sounds when shooting a normal bullet, and shooting monsters, and finally shooting clouds.
Bien, vamos a escuchar la última nota, ver si podemos resolver algún puzzle y terminar este episodio.
And then Cascade. All right. This is like a Rube Goldberg thing. There's all sorts of things going on in this level. The left half is coupled to the right half in complicated ways, so it's much more than one screen's worth of logic that we have to think about. So we've seen this idea of dividing the frequency by 2, stepping down the frequency. We did it in some earlier things by creating collisions, and now we can do that with the ring, so we can slow down that cannon. But there's also several nice places in this level where we can use the ring just to make our lives a little easier, right? To make the air control on some of the jumps a little easier. And then there's also some sequencing we have to think about here. So I had to jump on a monster to get onto the cannon that is floating above the flaming spikes. So I ended up placing the ring on that cannon and just leaving it there. And that meant that I had to think about the order in which I did things. And I just walked off without the ring. And luckily, I had a brand shiny new ring as soon as I entered the next level.
Yes, well, that is actually, that is intended that you leave it up there. And yeah, you left it up there, you know,
okay.
But it's a video game, right? So,
Well, yeah. Que sera, sera.
yeah, like I would like for there to be a way to get you to get that back, but you would have to add a bunch of contrived stuff to the level about maybe somehow
And
when
the
you
level
get in
already
there,
has so much stuff.
yeah, maybe somehow when you get in there, you can throw a switch that like opens a trap door above the thing so you could fall down and get it. But then you'd be thinking about that when you're trying to solve the puzzle, right?
Right.
So then maybe it could be a secret trapdoor that just looks like the rest of the background, but then you'd be through the rest of the game going like, I wonder if there's more secret backgrounds.
Well, and if it was that easy to get down onto the cannon, then we didn't need to do all the other stuff to get to the cannon.
It negates
to
your heroic
put
effort.
Exactly.
Yeah. There's some things that I also like about, well, and so the fact that you need to leave the ring on the level and leave the level is a little bit video gamey, but like we're a little bit postmodern here. I just really like the visual of the fireballs going into the slowdown zone and coming back out, and you seeing
nice.
the space dilation. Now, that said, okay, so one of the things I wanted to do with this level was make a level where the different puzzles sort of bleed into each other or influence each other, right? And are not separate. That's another instance of this thing that I do where I establish patterns where throughout most of the game the puzzles are separate, right? If two puzzles are on the same level,
they're usually on two separate screens. They're usually each about one screen big.
they're separated enough that you have a pretty good idea that they don't interact, and they're there more because they're related thematically.
Right.
And here all of a sudden that's different, and that increases the difficulty. And I think it decreases clarity, but I still wanted to do it in the game. And
so for me, that was pleasurable. I mean, I think some puzzles should be like that. You know, it's true that there's a lot of levels where it feels like a series of small puzzles, or little, like I said, little paradoxes or little koans. And this is much more like paragraph sized or, 5-paragraph essay sized. But I think it also helps here that once you have the logical idea, none of this execution is that hard. It's a little bit tricky to, like, even after you step down the frequency of the fireball cannon, the monster still has to go through several monsters. I think that there's a periodicity of roughly 4 or 5 before one of them gets through the gap in the fireballs down to the next level. It took me a couple tries to catch up with him and jump on top of him, or I guess I could have hung out there and let him move under me.
the
but instead
execution's
I
a little
had to,
bit hard there, I think.
It's a little bit hard, but not so hard. I mean, again, because I'm not a super platformer, I mean, like, I'm not somebody who could play, like, Celeste, right?
Okay.
I understand the beauty and the joy of those games, and I'm impressed by the people who can play those games. But for me, maybe I'm getting old, but that would be tough for me.
A la cual cualquier jugador de Celeste te diría, sí, el chiste es que sea difícil. Pero estoy más de su lado que de otro. Yo también. Estoy en el ocaso de mi vida y no tengo tiempo para probar las cosas una y otra vez hasta que me salgan. Así que no es el tipo de juegos que yo valoro. Nos quedaría solo llegar hasta acá, conseguir la llave. Vamos a terminar esto. Vamos a terminar el episodio terminando esta pantalla. Si yo quisiera conseguir la llave, pero ok. ¡Rayos! Entonces tal vez queremos poner el anillo un poco más ahí. ¡Oso! No. Pero... ¡Ah, rayos! Hay que dejarlo llegar más abajo. Pero y entonces... ¿Qué pasa si nos subimos a esta plataforma? ¿Tampoco podemos subirnos a esta plataforma? Vamos a dejarlo que llegue un poquito más lejos. Ahora sí, sí señor. Venga con papi. Y ahora... Y ahora hay que... A ver si esto me desacelera lo suficiente el cañón de abajo como para permitirme ir y volver. Me parece que no voy a poder volver. No. Así que sí, creo que no hay otra que ponerle el anillo encima y para eso necesito... desacelerar a este muñeco. Pero la puta madre. Hablando de renegar con la ejecución. Ve mi pequeño. Ahora sí. Y vos podés creer que me morí igual. What a chabón. What a chabón indeed. Suruk. Y con eso... Pero... Y con eso terminamos este nivel y este episodio. Mi nombre es Nachito y si estás disfrutando esta serie, por favor déjame un like, un comentario, un follow, un engagement, lo que sea. Nada más. Nos vemos.